these Pokemon only have one single card. So today I went through every single Pokemon and looked through how many cards have released for that Pokemon since day one. The card counts that I'm using for this were on Cerebi.net, its card decks, and essentially any card that releases over multiple sets. So it could be the same artwork, but it releases over multiple sets, or a completely different artwork, then it will go towards this different card count. And just going through this, it was really quite shocking to see how much imbalance there is between certain Pokemon. But just to show you exactly which Pokemon have the very, very lowest at a single card count. First one we've got is Cubfu, the second one is Glastrier, and the final one with just one card is Spectrier. So it is the trio here from this generation, all with just one singular released physical TCG card. So this is all the data that I've got here, and I've made some different sort of tabs with the data on here. But essentially I've gone all the way from Pokedex number 1 of Bulbasaur, and I've counted every single physical card that I can find for every single Pokemon. So yes, I went through every single Pokemon manually and counted this, because trying to put all the data together via AI or using other tabulated data, it was not accurate at all. So this is literally the physical work that I have gone through to count all of these, just because I was interested. So essentially here on the least cards list, I've filtered this by the count of the cards being the lowest, but of course because Pokemon released like a long time ago, or they might have released just a couple of years ago, that's not really the most accurate, technically speaking, to show just, you know, how many cards have been released over time. So I do have a separate list that shows the number of cards released per year on the far right, which you'll see that for these like Cubfu, Glastrier, it's at 0.17 because that's one card released over 6 years. But for the least, if we go through the least cards, then the ones with the most, and then we'll go through the releases per year count. But this is our top 10 here. Although to be fair, there are a few Pokemon here that also have a count of 3, quite a few actually. But if we go from our top 10, we've got Cubfu, Glastrier, Spectrier, Amora, Brionne, Overquill, Bramblegast, Voodoo, Quilladin, Tyrunt. And then just counting the other 3 count cards, we've got Tyrantrum, Aurorus, Trumbeak, Toucanon, Brunergius, Arctozolt, Basculegion, Pawmote, Knacklestack, Brute Bonnet, Slitherwing, Iron Juguli, Iron Moth, and Poltergeist. So some of those were released in 2022, so I'd say that let's just ignore these ones since, you know, we've had them only just recently. So I'd say all of these ones here are the ones that look like they've been ignored quite a bit. So, you know, like Trumbeak and Toucanon that were released in 2016 then. I feel like doing this, I really saw just how much hatred or just lack of interest the Pokemon Company, or the ones that do it and make the decisions, have for fossil Pokemon and Stage 2 starter Pokemon evolutions. It's actually really weird just how consistently they have a very low count for both of those things, the fossils and some of the starter Pokemon. And then if we look at the Pokemon with the most cards, I'm not surprised who number 1 is, but I am surprised at the sheer number of different cards that this Pokemon has. Number 1 is Pokedex number 25, Pikachu, the mascot of the franchise, with 289 different cards, which comes to 9.97 cards released per year. That is insane, considering Pikachu has been here since 1996, and it has way more than double the next highest, which is for Charizard. You know, the Pokemon that everyone that collects TCG cards got kind of sick of because like, oh, not another Charizard. Charizard's not even the big problem. It's definitely those Pikachu cards. And, you know, that's why you have dedicated collectors specifically going for, like, the Pikachu cards, the Charizard cards, just because there's so many of them. It's so difficult to get a complete set in, like, full PSA 10s for these Pokemon. But specifically the Pikachus, I was not expecting near 300 unique cards. And this is assuming that I haven't missed any or miscounted a couple, and there aren't any hidden ones that I've forgotten about and that weren't on the Cerebi card decks list. But I'll say that out of all of these Pokemon, the only one that actually surprised me was Unknown at 97 cards. And the reason why Unknowns is so high is purely because they listed all of the cards for each of the letters. So it just got tons and tons of cards printed for, you know, the A, B, C, D, E, F, G, like the actual alphabet pieces. So that's why the Unknown count is so high, which I wasn't expecting. But you'll notice that every single one of this top 10, apart from Unknown and Rayquaza, so -2, these are all Generation 1 Pokemon. Which, yes, we talk about Gen 1ers sometimes. It doesn't surprise me that, you know, the oldest ones have the highest card counts, which is why this cards released per year is a little bit more accurate to show you just how many that equals per year. But aside from this, we've also got a couple more Pokemon with a card count of 58, aside from the Meowth, being Gyarados and Snorlax, which, again, these are two Gen 1 Pokemon that are very, very popular, so this doesn't surprise me. But 58 cards is still a big chunk of cards to try and collect if you want to finish a collection. I have to say, I was not expecting Ninetales to be the next highest there at 52, but yeah, this top 10 is unsurprising apart from just the sheer count of how many there are. So like I said, rather than just looking at the pure card counts, let's look at this in terms of per year. And so you could question how I've done the year little calculation here, but essentially I've counted it literally from the year that that generation released, and technically when cards could have been released, how many years have there been, and then essentially I've divided it by how many cards were, you know, released for that Pokemon. So if we look at this by the least cards released per year, this is our top 10. Number 1 being poor old Voodoo with just 3 released cards during Generation 4 is when the Pokemon was released, and that's 0.16 per year. And then we've got Amora, which, again, one of those fossil Pokemon. Then we've got Cubfru, Glastrier, and Spectra that have only had 1 card. And then we've got Azurill, which is also at that same 0.17. Then Chingling, Bonsly, Happiny, and Wynaut. So if we look at this on a per year basis, we've got a combination of this mainly being fossil Pokemon. We've got a couple of Pokemon like the next one, Brionne, being those mid-stage starter evolutions. But then we've got a lot of these Pokemon, which are the baby form Pokemon. So for whatever reason, they just don't release a lot of these baby form Pokemon. I guess because sometimes with the TCG, you just have EX cards and stuff like that, so you don't need the pre-evolutions. But specifically, the lowest tier baby Pokemon seem to be some of the main ones. Again, I guess we could count Voodoo like that as well, even, although it's not happiness based, but anyway. But Voodoo is kind of like them as well, but these all have the lowest cards count released per year, which is quite sad, really. Just to look at a few others below the top 10 again, Brionne, Quilladin, then we've got the fossils, Tyrunt, Tyrantrum, Aurorus, we've got Mantike, which is another baby Pokemon, and then we've got Tortuga, Archon, which are more of those fossil Pokemon, then like Tyrogue, another one, Smoochum, Elekid, more of these fossil Pokemon, but then there is just randomly, you know, every so often just some random Pokemon that just seems to have not been touched for whatever reason. So, like Huntail there, for instance. So it just seems like there is a specific dislike for certain kinds of Pokemon. Definitely seems pretty consistent from what I can see. I'm not sure if that's purely because the Pokemon audience, like the players, don't like these Pokemon, or if there's just some inherent bias against putting these in certain sets. I don't know. Let me know what you think. And then if we look at the most cards released per year, per Pokemon, Pikachu is still in number 1 by actually not a massive margin, because we've got Pikachu here with 289 cards with 9.97 cards released per year. The next one did surprise me. That is Ogerpon with 29 cards released. And Ogerpon, of course, was one of the most recent Pokemon that released in 2022. And that means that they have 9.67 cards released per year so far, which is a lot. And the reason for this is because Ogerpon, they made like different card versions for all of the separate mask forms for Ogerpon. But even then, 29 is really quite high compared to, say, Koraidon and Miraidon, for instance, that are technically also very high on the card counts list at 15. But the difference between 15 cards since 2022 and 29 cards since 2022 is, well, quite substantial. But just to very quickly go through the rest of these, so again, we've got Koraidon, Miraidon, that are the box legendaries. We've got Morpeko, which is essentially the 2019 previous gen's version of like Pikachu, at 4.5 cards released per year. Then we've got Zacian as well, which did surprise me. Then we've got Charcadet, which, yes, they glaze the hell out of Charcadet. We've got Bellibolt, which they use with that VTuber all the time. Revavroom, I was not expecting that, but Revavroom also has 12 cards released, which is quite a lot. And then we've got another Pikachu-esque card on here, or Pokemon, at 34 cards for Mimikyu, working out at 3.78 cards released per year. And then just to name a couple under the top 10, that Unknown, again, purely because it's like alphabet stuff. And then we've got Duraludon, Urshifu, which, you know, considering Cubfu's got only one singular card, and then we've got Urshifu with 22 cards? Like, that's just absurd. And then we've got Lechonk, Toadscruel, Palafin, Varoom, and Cyclizar, all with 11 cards that came out in the same year. Then Lucario being one of the, I guess, unexpected ones compared to some of these ones here at 68 cards. Then Lycanroc, Charizard, Eevee. So actually, like, Eevee and Charizard, if we look at this on a yearly basis, they're actually, like, top 25 rather than top 10, which I thought was going to be a bit higher than that, to be honest with you. But yeah, interesting. Of course, because of the recency of some of these, and they've been releasing a lot of cards, yeah, a lot of these are going to appear as 2022 cards. So you could always filter those out if you wanted to and just look at all the ones that aren't 2022 cards. Like we've got Mewtwo here that's also quite high. But I did find all of this quite interesting. So I don't know, if you want to see the full lists, I can possibly share these in a shared file. But yeah, I would say that the least cards here definitely showed me a hell of a lot. The most cards for me weren't very, not interesting, but not surprising. So yeah, I guess Pokemon knows their audience well in terms of their most cards, or at least their physical trading card game collectors. Of course, we've got TCG Pocket now being a virtual version, and I could technically do a separate count for that or include those even in the total card counts, but I think the physical trading card game and TCG Pocket are two very different worlds, and possibly even two different audiences. Obviously there's some overlap, but I think it's very different player bases, or customer bases, shall I say. So that's why I didn't include them in here. But if you want to go for a challenge, if you want to go for a Pokemon that's going to be really difficult to complete a full set of, this is your count right here.